There is a painting locked away in a Swiss vault, hidden from public view for most of its existence, that shows what might be the most famous face in the world, but younger, softer, almost unrecognizable, and yet unmistakably her. If this painting is what some people claim it is, then the Mona Lisa you think you know was not the first. It was the second draft. This is the Isleworth Mona Lisa, sometimes called the earlier Mona Lisa, believed by some researchers to date from around 1503 to 1506, though that date depends entirely on an attribution that remains fiercely disputed. Its ownership history is murky, its current whereabouts guarded by private collectors, and its connection to Leonardo da Vinci unproven by any consensus among scholars. And yet it exists, physically, in the world, a painting that looks almost exactly like the most studied artwork in human history, except for the fact that everything about it might be wrong, or everything about it might be the missing beginning of the greatest portrait ever painted. Picture the two images side by side. In the Louvre's Mona Lisa, a woman sits with her hands folded, a faint, unreadable smile settling across her face, framed by a hazy, dreamlike landscape of winding rivers and distant mountains. In the Isleworth version, the pose is nearly identical, the same tilt of the head, the same folded hands, the same enigmatic half-smile, but the woman looks younger. Her skin is smoother, her features slightly less settled into the ambiguity that made the Louvre painting famous. Two columns flank her on either side, more visible than in the Paris version, framing her like a figure caught inside a doorway between two different moments in time. It is close enough to the Mona Lisa to trigger instant recognition, and different enough to feel faintly wrong, the way a familiar face looks strange in an old photograph taken years before you knew them. That unsettling gap between recognition and doubt is the entire emotional center of this story. Leonardo da Vinci himself remains, in many ways, more myth than man. A genius so mysterious that scholars still argue about the exact dates of his major works, his personal life, and how many paintings he actually completed in his lifetime. What we know for certain is that Leonardo worked slowly, revised obsessively, and was known to keep paintings in his studio for years, retouching them long after most patrons would have expected delivery. That habit of return, of reworking the same face or figure across different versions, is well documented in his career. Whether that habit extended to painting an earlier Mona Lisa before the one in the Louvre is exactly what remains unresolved. There is a particular kind of unease that comes from looking at something nearly identical to what you already know, and sensing that something has shifted. The Isleworth Mona Lisa produces exactly that sensation. The pose is the pose you already carry in your memory from 1,000 reproductions, postcards, and parodies. The smile is recognizably hers, and yet the woman in front of you looks like she hasn't lived through everything the Louvre version has lived through yet. If this painting really does depict an earlier stage of the same sitter, painted by the same hand, then we are looking at something almost nobody gets to see in art history, not the finished masterpiece, but the version before the artist decided what the masterpiece would ultimately become. We are looking, potentially, at doubt itself, frozen on canvas. An earlier attempt, before Leonardo settled on the ambiguous, aged, timeless expression that eventually made the Louvre painting immortal. But even that story depends on believing the attribution. Supporters point to the visible columns, the noticeably younger appearance of the sitter, and results from scientific dating tests that some researchers argue are consistent with Leonardo's working period. Skeptics counter that stylistic quality, brushwork, and historical documentation all fall short of what's needed to confidently assign this work to Leonardo himself, rather than to a student, a later copyist, or an entirely separate artist working in his shadow. Neither side has definitively won this argument. To understand why a painting like this can generate international headlines and legal disputes, we have to go back much further than Leonardo. Humans have always been captivated by the idea of the lost original, the first version, the true source, the untouched artifact standing behind every copy that came after. Religious traditions built entire pilgrimages around supposed original relics. Collectors have paid extraordinary sums for anything believed to be the earliest known example of something significant, often valuing that claim of firstness far above the object's actual visual beauty. This obsession isn't really about the object itself. It's about authority. An original carries a kind of magic that a copy, however skillfully made, can never fully claim. The Isleworth Mona Lisa taps directly into that ancient hunger. If it really is what its supporters claim, then it isn't simply another old painting. It's proof that even genius has rough drafts. It's evidence that even Leonardo da Vinci once looked at an unfinished version of his most famous work and thought not yet. When people want something to be true badly enough, they tend to interpret ambiguous evidence as confirmation rather than uncertainty. Carbon dating that places a canvas within a plausible historical window becomes, in the retelling, proof of authorship. Stylistic similarities become certainty. A compelling theory, repeated often enough, starts to feel like settled fact, even when the experts most qualified to judge remain divided. The Isleworth Mona Lisa sits inside exactly that psychological trap, in both directions. Enthusiastic supporters may be projecting their hope for a discovery onto scientific results that are genuinely inconclusive. Skeptics may be projecting their discomfort with disruption onto a painting that has never actually been definitively disproven either. Neither position is necessarily dishonest. Both simply reveal how badly humans want mysteries to resolve into clean, confident answers. Look closely at the background behind the woman's shoulders. In the Louvre Mona Lisa, the horizon lines on either side of her head sit at slightly different heights. A small but well-documented oddity. In the Isleworth version, those two flanking columns appear more clearly than in the final Louvre composition, where only faint column bases remain visible at the edges of the panel. Those columns matter more than they might first appear. If earlier versions of the composition included full columns, and Leonardo later cropped or altered that framing, it would suggest an evolving idea rather than a single fixed vision executed once and never revisited. Either it's evidence of Leonardo's own iterative process, refining a composition over years, exactly as his documented working habits suggest he often did, or it's evidence of a different artist inserting details that seemed historically plausible, but were never actually part of any earlier version at all. Neither reading is proven, but this is the closest thing the Isleworth Mona Lisa has to a real clue rather than a rumor. Maybe the deepest truth here isn't about who painted this canvas. Maybe it's about what it means to exist permanently in that unresolved space between confirmed masterpiece and complete forgery, never quite settling into either identity. A painting that might be one of the most important artworks connecting us to Leonardo's actual working process, forced instead to live behind vault doors, discussed mostly in academic disputes, never quite trusted enough to hang beside its more famous twin. We live now inside a culture obsessed with authenticity and increasingly unsure how to define it. Deepfakes blur the line between real footage and fabricated performance. AI-generated art raises constant questions about originality and authorship. Online, people curate versions of themselves that may or may not reflect who they actually are. The painting's unresolved status feels less like an old art world curiosity now, and more like a preview of a problem we're all going to face constantly going forward as originals and copies become harder and harder to distinguish, and as the emotional pull toward a comforting answer keeps outrunning our actual ability to verify one. Maybe the Isleworth Mona Lisa really is Leonardo's first attempt, hidden away for centuries before finally surfacing to challenge everything we thought we knew. Or maybe it's simply a skilled echo of a legend, destined to remain forever in that uncomfortable middle ground between proof and desire. Either way, the painting has already succeeded at something far stranger than authentication. It has revealed exactly how much we need one true version to exist, and exactly how uncomfortable we become when the evidence refuses to give us that certainty. So, maybe the real question isn't whether this is the first Mona Lisa. Maybe it's this. If we could never actually prove which face came first, would you still need to know? Or is the not knowing the part you can't actually let go of?